Ladies and gentlemen, Facebookers and Zoomers, welcome to the 19th Amendment Centennial Series event, hosted by Sonoma County 2020 Women's Suffrage Project. We are proud to present a Reader's Theater production of A Voice of Her Own, Women's Suffrage. Written and narrated by Bill Trzeciak. Before we get started with our performance, we would like to remind you, you have the unique experience tonight of sitting in your own theater, as well as being our audience. You may eat, drink, and merrily go about taking selfies because we cannot see you or hear you. You will be seeing each of our performers when they are speaking, and our slideshow is there to enrich your experience. So go back, sit back, relax, and enjoy this special online performance of A Voice of Her Own.
We bring a new star.
We are coming like the others, free sisters, free brothers, in the pride of our affection for California. A ballot for the lady, for the home, and for the baby. Come vote ye for the lady, the baby, the home. Star of hope and star of beauty, of freedom, of duty. Star of childhood's new protection that rises so high. We will work for it together in the golden gay weather, and we'll have it next election, or we will know why.
That was Another Star, a campaign song for California suffragists by Charlotte Perkins Gilman in 1911. Though an amendment to the United States Constitution that would allow women to vote in our national elections was introduced on the floor of the United States Senate in 1878, it was not yet passed until 1919. It read,
"The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex."
Those few words were written by suffragist Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and given to their dear friend and fellow suffragist Ellen Clark Sargent of Nevada City, California. She in turn gave them to her husband, California's United States Senator Aaron A. Sargent, the first person to utter the word suffrage on the Senate floor. However, that is not where it all began. The first women to vote on this continent were not white Europeans. From the words of Dr. Sally Roche Wagner, who wrote, "We Want Equal Rights, How Suffragists Were Influenced by Native American Women."
Indigenous women of numerous native nations had rights, sovereignty, and integrity long before European settlers arrived on these shores. They had complete control of their lives, maintained economic independence in marriage, and lived in a culture free from gender-based violence.
Many years into the 19th century fight for women's suffrage, Elizabeth Cady Stanton told an audience what Iroquois women had explained to her.
Women were the great power among the clan as everywhere else. The original nomination of the chiefs also always rested with the women. They did not hesitate, when occasion required, to knock the horns off, as it was called, from the head of a chief and send him back to the ranks of the warriors. Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
As an Indian woman, I was free. I owned my home, my person, the work of my own hands, and my children could never forget me. I was better as an Indian woman than under white law.
Carolyn Gahano, later Parker Mount Pleasant, was a Seneca woman who had intermarried with a neighbor of Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
While women in the United States are recognizing that 100 years ago, the Constitution finally recognized the right of U.S. women to vote, Native nation women have had political voice on this land since the founding of the Iroquois Haudenosaunee Confederacy over 1,000 years ago. And today, the Six Nations clan mothers continue to have the responsibility to nominate, hold in office, and remove their chiefs.
Just as our suffrage foremothers before us, we non-Native women have much to learn from Native women and their centuries of experience. Dr. Wagner.
The first European white woman allowed to vote on this continent did so on October 30th, 1756.
Mention should be made of the wife of Josiah Taft. Her husband died in 1756. A requisition was made upon the town of Uxbridge, Massachusetts, for a certain sum of money for colonial purposes. A meeting of the local voters,
all landholding white males,
was held to see if the money should be granted, determined that there should be no taxation without representation. The citizens of Uxbridge declared that the widow Josiah Taft should vote upon the question. She did so, and her vote was the one that decided in the affirmative that the money should be paid. Uxbridge may yet be famous for the pioneer in the cause of women's suffrage. Uxbridge historian.
In 1893, suffragist Lucretia Mott was born.
Credit not the old-fashioned absurdity that woman's is a secondary lot, ministering to the necessities of her lord and master. It is a higher destiny I would award you.
In 1815, suffragist Elizabeth Cady Stanton was born.
The general discontent I felt with a woman's portion as wife, housekeeper, physician, and spiritual guide, the chaotic conditions into which everything fell without her constant supervision, impressed me with a strong feeling that some active measures should be taken to remedy the wrongs of society in general and of women in particular.
In 1818, suffragist Amelia Bloomer, after whom the pantaloons were named, was born.
It will not do to say that it is out of women's sphere to assist in making laws, for if that were so, then it should be also out of her sphere to submit to them.
In 1819, poet suffragist Julia Ward Howe was born.
In the name of womanhood and humanity, I earnestly ask that a General Congress of Women may be appointed and held at some place deemed most convenient.
In 1820, Susan Burnell Anthony was born.
The true republic, men, their rights and nothing more, women, their rights and nothing less.
In 1826, suffragist Matilda Jocelyn Gage was born.
The modern world is indebted to the Iroquois for its first conception of inherent rights, natural equality of condition, and the establishment of a civilized government upon this basis.
Jigon Chassé, the Peace Queen, stands beneath a tall pine tree. A Haudenosaunee symbol of peace. She directs the war parties to put down their weapons and enter her house, where they will find food and warmth. New York Heritage Society.
Both Matilda Jocelyn Gage and Lucretia Mott spent time among indigenous tribes in upstate New York. Gage was honorarily adopted into the Wolf Clan of the Mohawks, with the right to vote in the Mohawk Nation, but not in the United States. Lucretia Mott spent a month in 1948 among the Seneca people. In Seneca Falls, Elizabeth Cady Stanton learned much from her Iroquois neighbors.
In the councils of the Iroquois, every adult male or female had a voice upon all questions brought before it. Usually the females ruled the house. The stores were in common. But woe to the luckless husband or lover who was too shiftless to do his share of providing, no matter how many children or whatever goods he might have in the house. He might at any time be ordered to pick up his blanket and budge. And after such an order, it would not be helpful for him to attempt to disobey. And unless saved by the intercession of some aunt or grandmother, he must retreat to his own clan or go and start a new matrimonial alliance in some other clan. Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
Soon after Stanton's summer spent with the Seneca, she, Lucretia Mott, Matilda Jocelyn Gage, and several others met at a Quaker friend's home in Seneca Falls to discuss plans for a meeting of women to discuss their rights in the United States. She also had recently attended an anti-slavery convention.
My experience at the World Anti-Slavery Convention, all I had read of the legal status of women and the oppression I saw everywhere, together swept across my soul. I could not see what to do or where to begin. My only thought was a public meeting for protest and discussion. Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
Within a couple of days, this notice appeared in newspapers.
A convention to discuss the social, civil, and religious condition and rights of women will be held in the Wesleyan Chapel at Seneca Falls, New York on the 19th and 20th of July. During the first day, the meeting will be exclusively for women.
The speedy success of our course depends upon the zealous and untiring efforts of both men and women for the overthrow of the monopoly of the pulpit and for securing women equal participation with men. Lucretia Mott.
Among the second day speakers was ex-slave turned orator Frederick Douglas.
In this denial of women's right to participate in government, one half of the intellectual power of the government of the world is lost. Frederick Douglass.
And it was his masterful arguments and matchless eloquence that the resolution passed despite powerful opposition. Therefore, whenever the women of this country paused long enough to think about the hard fight which had to be waged so as to enable them to enjoy their rights as citizens, they should remember the great debt of gratitude they owe to a colored man at a crucial occasion point when no other man was willing to come to their aid. Mary Church Terrell, African-American suffragist leader.
The convention voted to adopt what they called a Declaration of Sentiments, written by Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary,
we hold these truths to be self-evident.
A decent respect to the opinions of mankind.
That all men and women are created equal.
That they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights.
that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That to secure these rights, governments are instituted,
deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
Among the long list of grievances from their gender,
he has compelled her to submit to laws in which she had no voice.
He has withheld from her rights which are given to both natives and foreigners.
Having deprived her of this first right as a citizen, the elective franchise, thereby leaving her without representation in the halls of legislation, he has oppressed her on all sides.
Such has been the patient sufferance of the women under this government, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to demand the equal station to which they are entitled.
The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her.
He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise.
He has endeavored in every way that he could to destroy her confidence in her own powers, to lessen her self-respect, and to make her willing to lead a dependent and abject life.
Now, in view of this entire disfranchisement of one half the people of this country, their social and religious degradation, we insist that they have immediate admission to all the rights and privileges which belong to them as citizens of these United States.
In entering upon the great work before us, we anticipate no small amount of misconception, misrepresentation, and ridicule, but we hope this convention will be followed by a series of conventions embracing every part of the country.
Firmly relying upon the final triumph of the right and the true, we do this day affix our signatures to this declaration.
The right,
The true,
The final
Triumph!
the final triumph.
naturally, newspapers at the time covered the event with varying degrees of seriousness. The Mechanics Advocate of Albany had this to say.
We are sorry to see that the women in several parts of this state are holding what they call a women's rights convention and setting forth a formidable list of those rights in a parody of the Declaration of Independence. Now requires no argument to prove that this is all wrong.
Or this from the Philadelphia Ledger and Daily Transcript.
All women are not as reasonable as ours of Philadelphia. The Boston ladies contend for the rights of women. The New York girls aspire to mount the rostrum, to do all the voting, and we suppose all the fighting too. Our Philadelphia girls object to fighting and to holding office. Women have enough influence over human affairs without being politicians. Is not everything managed by female influence? A woman is nobody. A wife is everything. A pretty girl is equal to 10,000 men, and a mother is, next to God, all powerful. The women of Philadelphia, therefore, under the influence of the most serious, sober second thoughts, are resolved to maintain their rights as wives, belles, virgins, and mothers, and not as women.
And even this, according to Matilda Jocelyn Gage, from a crowd listening to her speak in 1850.
Let women first prove they have souls. Both the church and the state deny it.
It was in her Washington, D.C. office as the wife of a sitting congressman with open views about equality and fairness that Ellen Sargent met Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and began a lifelong friendship and suffrage activist partnership with both.
How can the consent of the governed be given if the right to vote be denied? Susan B. Anthony.
In the criminal code, we find he, his, him, but no feminine pronouns. We are arrested, tried, and hung, but we are denied the highest privileges of citizens because the pronouns she, hers, and her are not found in the constitutions. If women can pay the penalties of their crimes as he, why may they not enjoy the privileges of citizens as he? Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
While Aaron Sargent served his term as senator, his wife Ellen became both hostess and stalwart administrator to the National Woman Suffrage Association. Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote of her,
The work of the National Association rested on a small group. None were more important in this period than Ellen Sargent in Washington, D.C. She oversaw congressional lobbying, arranged the annual conventions, and mailed thousands of tracts and petitions to post offices around the country.
in the Senate, Aaron Sargent called for more than the vote for women.
Women under disabilities as to property, inheritance, business, and even in the custody of their children. And I asked Congress to pass a law enabling women to become lawyers. And after that, women be given permission to plead before the Supreme Court.
Aaron asked at one time that new territories established by the United States, such as the Dakota Territory, allow suffrage to women. At another time, he spoke about the District of Columbia.
I know of no better place than the capital nation where a more decisive trial can be made to establish the expediency of woman suffrage.
Resolved that the thanks of the National Woman Suffrage Association are hereby tendered to the Honorable A.A. Sargent of California for his earnest words in behalf of women's suffrage on the floor of the United States Senate.
And I ask that a female clerk receive the same pay as a male clerk for the same sort of work in the federal service.
Surely you jest, sir.
Who fears the competition of women? I do not believe in putting political responsibilities upon women. We degrade their characters, that we in any way make them less noble and admirable as women, as wives, as mothers.
The senator always was a true and consistent friend of suffrage and frequently said to Miss Anthony,
"Tell my wife what you want done, and if she endorses it, I will try to bring it about."
Work and let work, each in her own way. We cannot all work alike any more than we can all look alike. Action helps us. Inaction means death. Ellen Sargent.
In 1872, in Rochester, New York, Susan B. Anthony and 14 other women voted in the presidential election in violation of the law. From the transcript of the trial.
May it please the court and gentlemen of the jury, on the 5th of November, 1872, there was held in this state a general election. The defendant, Miss Susan B. Anthony, at that time resided in the city of Rochester, Northern District of New York, and voted for a representative in the Congress of the United States. At that time, she was a woman. Has the prisoner anything to say why sentence shall not be pronounced?
"Yes, Your Honor, I have many things to say. My natural rights, my civil rights, my political rights, my judicial rights are all alike ignored. Robbed of the fundamental privilege of citizenship, I am degraded from the status of a citizen to that of a subject. And by Your Honor's verdict, I am doomed to political subjection under this so-called Republican form of government."
The court cannot listen to a rehearsal of argument which the prisoner's counsel has already consumed 3 hours in presenting.
May it please your honor. I am not arguing the question, but simply stating the reasons why sentence cannot, in justice, be pronounced against me. Your denial of my citizens' right to vote is the denial of my right of consent as one of the governed. And what I really want to say is that
The court cannot allow the prisoner to go on.
but your honor will not deny me this one and only poor privilege of protest against this high-handed outrage upon my citizens' rights. May it please the
The
court.
prisoner must sit down. The court cannot allow it.
Under such circumstances, a commoner of England, trial before a jury of lords, would have far less cause to complain than have I, a woman, tried before a jury of men. And
The court must insist the prisoner has been tried according to the established forms of law.
yes, your honor, but by forms of law all made by men, interpreted by men, administered by men, in favor of men and against women. And hence your honor's ordered verdict of guilty against a United States citizen for the exercise of the citizen's right to vote, simply because that citizen was a woman and not a man.
The court orders the prisoner to sit down. It will not allow another word.
Failing to get this justice, failing even to get a trial by a jury not of my peers, I ask not leniency at your hands, but rather the full rigor of the law.
The court must insist the prisoner will stand up. The sentence of the court is that you pay a fine of $100 and the cost of prosecution.
May it please your honor, I will never pay $1 of your unjust penalty. Not a penny shall go to this unjust claim. And I shall continue to urge all women to remember the old revolutionary maxim: resistance to tyranny is obedience to God.
Madam, the court will not order you to stand committed until that fine is paid.
When Miss Anthony returned home, she found this telegram from Senator Sargent.
I laid the case before President Ulysses S. Grant today. He kindly orders your pardon. Papers are being prepared.
So pardoned, Miss Anthony's fine stands against her to the present day.
Women continued marching and facing opposition, both legal and physical, for years. Finally, Ellen Sargent's husband had enough backing to bring up suffrage in the United States Senate. On January 10th, 1878, by unanimous consent, he presented the following joint resolution, which was read twice and referred to the Committee on Privileges and Elections.
Joint resolution proposing an amendment to the Constitution of the United States, Article 16, Section 1. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex.
Afterward, there was no little derision from most of the senators assembled there. Senator Sargent attempted to get the Senate to invite women to come speak from each state, representing the 10,000 who had signed a petition for suffrage.
Resolved that at a session of the Senate to be held on such a date, said representative women may be heard before the Senate, but for 1 hour only.
The craven Senate ignored his request. Let it be recorded of the Senate of the 45th Congress that the one petition which it received as a preposterous joke and treated with utter contempt and outrage was that of tens of thousands of the mothers, wives, and daughters of the land. National Women's Suffrage Association.
From the New York Tribune, February 7th. The senators who voted today against the bill to relieve certain legal disabilities of women are marked men and have reason to fear the result of their action.
The amendment had no chance of passing. Senator Sargent's term having expired, he returned with his family to San Francisco. He passed away in 1887. Ellen Sargent spent the rest of her years educating others about the need to allow women to vote.
The Sargent's home, wherever it was always open to all suffragists. This was the group that founded San Francisco's first women's club, the Century Club, which still flourishes. Mrs. Sargent was president of the California Women's Suffrage Association for 6 terms. The impact of the Sargent family, including children George and Elizabeth, on the suffrage movement in California was inestimable. May Silver, the 6th star.
Ellen Clark Sargent was arguably the most experienced advocate of women's suffrage in California. Anne D. Gordon in the selected papers of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony.
Ellen carried on correspondence with both pro and anti-suffrage forces. To the Republican Convention Platform Committee of 1888, she wrote,
Please ascertain for many interested women if the clause in the platform concerning the sovereign right of every lawful citizen to a free ballot includes the women of the United States.
I do not think it is so construed here.
We must remove women from the pedestal on which we have elevated them and think of them and treat them as human beings.
in 1896, Ellen's Suffrage Association got the vote for women onto the California ballot. But the large liquor industry claimed once women got into office, they would shut down liquor, even though the temperance movement and the suffrage movement had long ago split.
The measure lost because of those fears.
Ellen Clark Sargent never stopped agitating for women's rights. In 1901, she refused to pay her property taxes on the grounds that it was taxation without representation.
San Francisco, July 15th, 1901. Mrs. Ellen Sargent has been defeated in her attempt to secure privilege of voting. Judge Sloss decided against her. In a written opinion, the judge said,
Counsel for the plaintiff has made an elaborate and learned argument for the purpose of establishing the right of women to vote.
Arguing for his mother, that counsel for the plaintiff was her son, George Sargent.
it was recognized that all persons who were subjected to the burdens of government, women as well as men, were entitled to participate in the control of such government. Second, it is argued that the Constitution of this state, the right of women to vote, is in fact recognized.
The denial of the right of suffrage to women is not an invasion of any right guaranteed to them by the Constitution of the United States.
But the Constitution of the United States of California names the people.
If this argument were to be carried to a logical conclusion, it would result in the franchise being extended to idiots and insane persons, as well as to individuals of sound mind.
Ellen knew she would lose. That wasn't the reason for her case.
In conclusion, women are not qualified by sex to exercise the elective franchise.
News of the case spread across the country, reinvigorating millions of activists to step up again to keep working to get the vote. That was Ellen's reason.
The ballot gained. It cannot be denied. Let bigots sneer, for less have martyrs died.
By 1911, the vote for women had again come up on the California ballot, and Ellen was the leading proponent.
This campaign badge was silky yellow, fringed at both ends. Yellow, or more precisely, California gold, was the official color of the suffrage movement and campaigns in California.
A ballad for the lady, for the home, and for the baby. Come vote ye for the lady, the baby, the home. We will work for it together in the golden gay weather, and we'll have it next election, or we will know why.
Before that October election, however, Ellen Clark Sargent passed away. Ellen had given her life to the cause. After Wyoming in 1869, Colorado in 1893, Utah and Idaho in 1896, and Washington in 1910, on October 10th, 1911, California became the sixth state in the nation to vote in equal suffrage, according to a Santa Rosa Press Democrat article about the vote.
Passage of the amendment to the state constitution had not been easy. It won by a narrow 2% statewide and by 4 points in Sonoma County. Petaluma, Sonoma, Windsor, and Healdsburg all voted against allowing women to vote. Local support was only enthusiastic in Santa Rosa, where male voters approved by a 14-point margin.
However, while Western states voted in statewide suffrage, Eastern and Southern states kept voting it down. During these years of struggle, the National Association split into two organizations. The National Women's Suffrage Association was under the leadership of Carrie Chapman Catt. Her winning plan, as it was called, tried to mildly assuage legislation from within through pragmatic lobbying.
Roll up your sleeves, set your mind to making history, and wage such a fight for liberty that the whole world will respect our sex. Carrie Chapman Catt.
And in 1913, Alice Paul, who had suffered famously through hunger strikes in England's more aggressive public disruption suffrage movement, and Lucy Burns formed the Congressional Union for Women's Suffrage to protest with much more force.
There will never be a new world order until women are a part of it. When you put your hand to the plow, you can't put it down until you get to the end of the road. Alice Paul.
It is unthinkable that a national government which represents women should ignore the issue of the right of all women to political freedom. Lucy Burns.
Besides picketing the White House and getting arrested where she suffered more in hunger strikes, Paul and Burns created a massive march in Washington, D.C., March 3rd, 1913, just days before the inauguration of President Woodrow Wilson. It was led by suffragist Inez Milholland on a white horse. Behind her was a large float displaying the demands of the nearly 10,000 marchers, easily seen by 500,000 onlookers.
There had never been a procession of women for any cause under the sun. So people did want to go and see it. Alice Paul.
After it was about a third of the way through, however, the march was blocked by rabid opponents. Suffragists were attacked and 300 of them were injured. Police and federal forces were 200 arrests of marchers only.
There would be nothing like this happens if you would just stay at home.
Despite the general intention of the march, both the conservative and progressive suffrage activists failed to allow the participation of women of color. Trying to appease the demands of Southern state suffragists, Black suffragists were put at the back of the parade. Among those who refused to accept that, however, was journalist Ida B. Wells. She marched with a delegation from her home state of Illinois.
Either I go with you or not at all. I'm not taking this stand because I personally wish for recognition. I'm doing it for the future benefit of my whole race. Ida B. Wells.
Back in the beginning years of the National Women's Suffrage Association, ex-slave Harriet Tubman had worked with Susan B. Anthony. Later, Sojourner Truth spoke powerfully for the cause.
We are now trying for liberty that requires no blood, that women shall have their rights, not rights from you. Now, if you want me to get out of the world, you better get the women voting soon. I shan't go till I can do that. Sojourner Truth.
But it was not to last. Black women had dual struggles to contend with after emancipation. One was with post-Reconstruction racism, and the other was with their counterpart Black males who were not supporters. They, however, formed their own suffrage associations. In 1892, these organizations coalesced into the National Association of Colored Women under the leadership of Mary Church Terrell.
A white woman has only one handicap to overcome, that of sex. I have two, both sex and race. Colored men have only one, that of race. Colored women are the only group in this country who have two heavy handicaps to overcome, that of race as well as that of sex. Mary Church Terrell.
Among the non-white suffragists marching was Marie Louise Bottineau, a Native American working in Washington as a lawyer.
Did you ever know that Indian women were among the first suffragists and that they exercised the right of recall? The trouble in this Indian question, which I meet again and again, is that it is not the Indian who needs to be educated so constantly up to the white man, but that the white man needs to be educated to the Indian. Marie Louise Bottineau.
Though the American suffrage movement was inspired by Native Americans, Indigenous people did not get the vote until a decade after the passage of the Snyder Act of 1924, which gave them citizenship. Their rights to vote were then decided state by state after that.
The last one, Maine, didn't recognize the right until the 1960s, even though the original 1819 state constitution had initially given it to them.
By the combined efforts of both Carrie Catt's conservative suffrage movement and Alice Paul's confrontational progressives, northeastern states began to vote for suffrage within their states. Finally, in 1919, with a vote of only one more than the two-thirds majority needed, the United States Senate at last adopted what was to become the 19th Amendment, recognizing women's right to vote. State legislators began to ratify it in quick succession across the country. But when the measure hit Tennessee, it was a toss-up whether that state would carry it forward to achieving the necessary 3/4 of the state for full ratification. There was much opposition. Among the forces storming into Tennessee to fight ratification was a newspaper advertisement in August 1920 entitled "The Truth About the Negro Problem."
For the sake of Southern civilization, for the sake of womanhood, and for the sake of the welfare of the Negro race as well as the white race, the Susan B. Anthony Amendment should be defeated. The better class of Negroes themselves know that they are better represented by able white men than they would be by designing politicians of their own race, just as the majority of the women themselves feel they are better represented by the fathers of their children than they would be by politically ambitious office seekers of their own sex.
Through 3 roll calls, there was a contentious fight on the floor of the Tennessee State House. Author Heiress described the events.
Tennessee suffragists were united under a single symbol, the yellow rose. Yellow roses, in fact, were in vogue in Nashville that summer.
But so were red roses, the flower of choice for the anti-suffragist. Even the legislators showed their colors by wearing roses on their lapels. With wilted collars and frayed nerves, the legislators squared off for the 3rd roll call.
My sister suffragist had to leave for an important date, but she wanted me to say, a blatant red rose on his breast. Harry Byrne, the youngest member of the legislature, suddenly broke the deadlock. Despite his red rose, he voted in favor of the bill, and the House erupted into pandemonium.
What?
With his yay, Byrne had delivered universal suffrage to all American women. The outraged opponents to the bill began chasing Representative Byrne around the room.
In order to escape the angry mob, Byrne climbed out of one of the 3rd floor windows of the Capitol. Making his way along a ledge, he was able to save himself by hiding in the Capitol attic.
When the tempers had cooled, Burns was asked to explain the red rose on his lapel and his yellow rose vote.
He responded that while it was true he was wearing a red rose, what people couldn't see was that his breast contained a telegram from his mother in East Tennessee.
Dear
And now,
hurrah, and vote for suffrage. Don't keep them in doubt. I noticed some of the speeches against. They were bitter. I have been watching to see how you stood, but I have not noticed anything yet. Don't forget to be a good son and help Mrs. Catt put the rat in ratification. Your mother.
Governor A.H. Roberts signed the bill on August 24, 1920, and 2 days later, the 19th Amendment became national law.
140 years after the Declaration of Independence, American women had earned the constitutional right to vote, thanks in large part to a woman named Phoebe Burns and her son, Harry. Heiress.
That is, American white women got the vote in 1920.
But Black women in the South, as well as Black men, were kept away from the ballot box by Jim Crow laws and physical intimidation until 1965. Civil rights legislation answered decades of blood-soaked persistence against massive resistance.
The struggle to keep all American people from voting goes on today in myriad of nefarious and politically driven ways, even as we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the victory for women that came as a result of one single vote.
One
vote.
One woman.
50-some years after that, Congresswoman Bella Abzug could say,
"The place for a woman is in the House."
The House of Representatives.
and the Senate.
Oh, all right, or an office in the White House.
And there's another office waiting for a woman after that.
In the 1920 election, it will be 100 years since women got to vote in the United States. It's about time for every woman to make the voice of her own loud, proud, and overwhelming. Thank you.
And thank you again to all of our performers and all of you for attending this live performance of A Voice of Her Own. Please continue all of your applause as we introduce our amazing performers and they take their virtual bow. Proudly introducing our writer, director, and narrator, Bill Trzeciak.
Thank you very, very much for watching and listening. And do me a big favor, do yourselves a favor. Please vote and get everybody you know to vote with you. Thank you.
Thank you all for being such a wonderfully rapt audience and listening to all of us. We hope you had a wonderful time. We hope you learned something because we all certainly did. And I just have one last note. Don't forget to vote. Thank you so much.
That was Shirley Bennett. And we're also very proud of, coming straight from Florida, it's a local gal that likes to travel and be an activist. It's Nanci Hoban.
Your vote is your voice. Vote November 3rd. Don't waste the work that all of these people, all of these women have done for us for 100 years.
And we're joined this evening by none other than Jacqueline Lawrence.
I may be black, but ain't I a woman? We will have it next election, or we will know why.
Keep that applause rolling in. It is Mr. Bill Montgomery.
Thank you for coming on our journey with us. And don't forget, November 3rd, 2020, you must vote.
And none other than Millie Olson.
Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. The most important thing is for you and everyone you know to vote by mail. Sign up for permanent vote by mail. It's very easy to do. Tell 2 other people to do it and follow up with them, and let's vote and win on November 3rd.
And a man who not only wears many hats, but he has them. It's Mr. Lee Pierce.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your afternoon with us. And also thanks to my fellow actors for being here and holding me up. Ladies and gentlemen, as you've heard, please make sure that the moment you receive your ballot in the mail, you vote and turn it in. And also, if you haven't completed the 2020 census form, please do so before it's too late. Thank you so much.
And with technical assistance from Miss Janet Reynolds.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and thank you all for coming today. As the others have said, this election is probably one of the most important elections of our lives. I'm going to ask you to promise to ask 3 people, even if they're complete strangers, if they're going to vote on November 3rd. And please remember to vote on November 3rd. Thank you.
And I want to pass on to all of our performers some great comments from the crowd. Mr. Ron Taylor says, bravo, bravo. And from Catherine Dodd, it's great. Also from one of our attendees, it's a great job, very educational, loved the historical pictures, excellent acting and singing. And with that, folks, I am Leslie Graves, your MC, and with my own voice, I say, keep fighting for universal enfranchisement for all. Thank you. Thank you to all of our performers. They did a beautiful job. One more big cheer from all of them.
Hats off.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you attending. And remember that this has been a 19th Amendment Centennial event. To learn more about our remaining events, please visit our link at socowomen2020.org, where there will also be a recording of this performance. Thank you, and good night.